even children. I hope I said that close to correctly.
You said it as incorrectly as I say it, because I can't even pronounce my name properly. It's a Tibetan name, and my Tibetan pronunciation isn't very good, so you learned my wrong way of saying my name. It's okay.
Well, yeah, it's such a tricky language because it's one of those that you don't have any sort of bearings with, you know? So it's you see these names, or I've read like Chogyam Trungpa books and things like that, but you're always just kind of guessing and sounding it out in your mind as you're reading it. But I've never been sure how to do that. But like I said, it's a huge honor to have you here. You're such an accomplished, wise person, and I feel like I have a lot of people on this show who do a lot of self-exploration, almost as I hesitate to say hobby because that makes it sound, pretty non-serious, but it's another level when you dedicate your life to that self-exploration.
Yep.
And one of the questions that I'm just obsessed with asking people who have really dedicated themselves to a certain path is, what was the catalyst for you that really led you to make the decision to become an ordained monk and dedicate your life to this self-exploration?
People often ask me that as if it's one thing that happens that makes you decide to go a different direction in your life. And I don't think things are that simple, that it's just one thing. It's a very complex thing of many different factors, because if I hadn't grown up the way I had grown up, thinking the way I thought, then when I met these Tibetan teachers, I wouldn't have had the same response to them. And so I can't just attribute it to one thing. What I can say, if you want to hear the process, was, I grew up in a middle-class family outside of LA, and I didn't find life very meaningful when I looked at the life of the adults around me. I grew up during the Vietnam War, during the race riots, just before the women's movement. And so there was a lot going on in the country, and people were thinking a lot about things. And I kind of looked at the lives of regular middle-class people in America, and I thought, this doesn't inspire me. I want a life that has some meaning and purpose. I want to feel, that my life makes some difference in the world. And I didn't know exactly what that was. I knew it had something to do with benefiting people, but kind of getting married, climbing up the whatever ladder in my career, having 2.5 children, going to family gatherings and cruise vacations. This didn't interest me. So there was that going on. And then I had talked to, as a teenager in high school, talked to many different religions. I mean, as many different religions as you can find in a white middle-class suburb.
Sure.
Which is like, I was from a Jewish family, so we were the minority, and I was glad. I grew up knowing what it feels like to be in a minority, but the community had different branches of Protestantism and Catholicism, and that was it. And when I asked questions from either, the Jewish rabbi, the Catholic priest, the various Protestant ministers, none of their answers made sense. So, I kind of threw out religion, basically. I didn't find it very helpful. On the other hand, you know, there was a lot going on politically with protests for the war and everything. And I thought, you know, that has some meaning. But when the protests turned violent, I said, something's wrong here. You know, that this isn't right. How can you protest violence using violence? That doesn't make any sense. So I was, you know, looking for basically something that made some sense. And in the, you know, I had traveled some after I graduated from college. I traveled for a year and a half and worked for a while. Then in the middle of that, I happened to go to a retreat taught by 2 Tibet lamas. Yeah. And so learning from them, doing some more retreat, and then it was basically the next natural step. Yeah.
So what was it like coming into contact with some people that have really walked the walk? Because, you know, you encapsulated so many of the yearnings that I personally have and that so many other people have, you know, maybe with different particular trappings in their own personal lives, but that feeling of something being missing and wanting to aspire to something more and doing something that matters. Mm-hmm. And again, you know, for me, growing up in white suburbia, very similar. You know, I never understood religion or how these things that these people were doing were going to help them come into contact with the ineffable without doing some sort of work. You know, there's in Western religion, there's no sitting down and really doing the work other than reading a book and memorizing some things. And, you know, I don't want to belittle it, but I've always felt there needed to be that personal responsibility, that personal work. And Buddhism has that. And that's one of the things that draws me to it is meditation is this central aspect. Inner exploration is this central aspect to the practice of Buddhism. And for you, what was that like when you came into contact with these lamas? Had you already been meditating at this point, or was this really the introduction? It
was really an introduction. I had gone to a few different things by different kind of New Age things, but didn't have a meditation practice. And in one way, I mean, people come to the Dharma in different ways, but what I learned afterwards is you have to have some foundation of where you're going for your meditation to be meaningful. Otherwise, you can sit down. Actually, you know, I did meditate a little bit before I met the Dharma. But, you know, you go to this group and that group, and this one talks about this, that one talks about that. And then you have experiences according to what other people talked about. But, you know, none of these other things had a clear path about how to cultivate your mind, where you want to go, how you want to develop yourself, what is of value and meaning. And, you know, just left to my own abilities, sitting there with closed eyes, you know, I could invent 5,382 different things and have appearances and this and that and the other thing, but so what? Where's it getting me? Yeah. So, you know, I actually learned to meditate from my teachers. And so when I started, it was having in mind an idea of why I was meditating, what qualities I wanted to develop, where I was going with my meditation, what the ultimate goal was, how I could use this to benefit other people.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating because, you know, now especially when you're learning to meditate, at least for me, it's always coming into contact with just general mindfulness and really having no agenda and trying to, you know, stop these recursive thought patterns that you experience throughout the day. And that's really the only point.
Yeah.
I've always thought, you know, I do find that useful, and I do practice meditation, not as regularly as I should. It's funny because I actually, literally as we're speaking, I have a alert on my screen that says to meditate. I set like a daily reminder, and I can ignore probably 75% of the time. So That shows how dedicated I am. But with mindfulness kind of being this, buzzword lately, and something that's really divorced from the lineage that it was born out of.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, because it does have these measurable benefits. It seems to reduce stress. It seems to reduce, heart disease even, and encourages longevity. I heard it even can lengthen the telomeres on the end of your chromosomes, which is something that's associated with, longevity. So it has these benefits, but it's also, we're kind of ignoring where it was born from. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I could go on about this for a really long time. I'll try not to. I'll try and make it succinct. First of all, what is being called mindfulness now is actually the way of meditation taught in Burma by Mahasi Sayadaw, which is, I think, more accurately called bare attention, because it's asking you simply to pay attention to whatever is occurring in your mind at that moment and label it, notice it, not cling on to it, and follow, whatever sequence of different things come in, just noting them, observing them, not getting involved in them. And it's very helpful, like you said, I don't dispute that. But that's the Mahasi Sayadaw method of, meditation. You have the whole rest of Theravada Buddhism, you have the Mahayana tradition. There's many, many ways to meditate, okay? Many ways. It's not just one kind of thing. And actually in the Buddhist tradition, when we talk about mindfulness, it's usually in terms of the four establishments of mindfulness, where you're learning about your body, feelings, meaning happiness, unhappiness, and neutral, your mind, and then other phenomena like different mental states. And you're given, some instruction on how to observe these and what things to put your attention on as you're observing them, what things to see how it influences your experience, and then the kind of conclusion that you want to come to as a result, so that it really enhances your spiritual path. Because the way mindfulness is taught right now is very good in a secular context, but that will not get you to liberation or full awakening. It will.
Yes, and that's getting into some of the really central tenets of Buddhism, which I would love to discuss, because I don't think I've actually ever discussed those on this show. Mm-hmm. But I'm also fascinated by what you're saying about meditation, because, as I said, I've never practiced it this way, where you begin with an intention and you work on that intention. And the way you're speaking of it, it's almost like you're manifesting this intention into reality in some way, shape, or form. And I'm curious if you could just give me an overview of how, as an everyday person with everyday struggles and relationship things and work things and stresses and etc. Mm-hmm. How do you work with students, for example, who maybe are going through something difficult and they need to use meditation in this way?
Okay, so how to work with somebody who's going through a difficult situation to use meditation. First of all, it would depend on who the person is. I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer, and I think anybody who does, it would be irresponsible. Because whenever you help somebody, you have to look at the particular situation of that person. So it would, has this person meditated before? What religion did they grow up as? How do they think? What kind of teachings have they heard before? I would have to take all those kind of things into consideration, you know, and I wouldn't just say, sit down, close your eyes and meditate, because what in the world does that mean? Or sit down, close your eyes and watch your breath, you know? And it would depend on what's the problem somebody has. Are they suffering from anger? Are they suffering from attachment? Are they suffering from frustration or arrogance or jealousy? So the kind of help I would give somebody and the type of meditation I would introduce would depend on all these other factors.
Sure.
Yeah.
And again, you know, that's just so interesting to me because it makes the waters so much deeper, you know, and to know that there are all these methods out there. But what I find so interesting is that regardless of the, you know, school of Buddhism or almost any school of thought or philosophy or religion that's actually more interested in having direct experience. You know, I'm talking about maybe like the Sufi tradition or the Kabbalist tradition. They always seem to somehow land in a very similar place in terms of practicing compassion, you know, understanding that the larger reality is something much more like a state of oneness than we understand. And I find that so fascinating that all these different traditions end up landing in a similar place if they do the actual inner work. And I'm curious, why do you think that is?
First of all, let me backtrack for a minute.
Sure.
I can't say for 100% sure that in all aspects, all the traditions wind up in the same place. So I'm very glad you said similar, because same and similar are different, you know? So if we say similar place, then I think we have to look in what ways are they similar. So you mentioned compassion. So that, yeah, I think if you have people who genuinely practice whatever their tradition is, they're going to be training in love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, yeah, all those kind of empathy, all those kind of interpersonal feelings have got to be part of a spiritual path. You know, your spiritual path isn't just, there's the crazy world out there, I'm getting away from it. It's, how can I transform myself so that I can be a benefit to this crazy world? Yeah, and how can I overcome my own craziness? You know, I don't start, in other words, we don't start out as, well, I'm special because this is a crazy world and I see it as crazy, so I'm somehow superior to these people. We're just as crazy as everybody else. But you start looking at your own mind and being able to assess, okay, well, what ways do I have of thinking, and what habitual emotional patterns do I have that lead me down the slippery slope into acting in ways that create problems for myself and others?
Yes, and those are so difficult to identify, and I think by focusing on those, it really mitigates the, you know, I think there is a real pitfall with what you're talking about, where you start on a spiritual path and you start having better habits, and it's easier to start seeing the deficiencies in others and the habitual patterns in others, and it's so tempting to just shake your head and be like, these people don't even realize how wasteful and vapid and trivial they're being right now. Meanwhile, forgetting that you yourself still have such a long way to go in that respect. And I think that's so common right now, some sort of like ego-driven spirituality, you know, like an ego-driven self-improvement, and people don't even realize that they're just catering to this construct of themselves that they've built over time. And I don't know how to avoid that. I guess it probably comes back to having a strong, regular practice that allows you to identify those things.
I think it comes from, for me, It comes from having a teacher, you know, who will point things out to me. It comes from having the spiritual tradition that doesn't let your ego kind of wiggle out right, left, and center. You know, and this is why I think it's really important to listen to teachings and have a teacher. You know, and not just any teacher, but a teacher that you trust, that you've observed over time, a path that's reliable, where you can look at the people who've practiced it, how they come out. Because otherwise, you're just, you know, floating in the dark. What is it? The blind leading the blind. Yeah?
Yes, yes.
And one thing that I particularly appreciate about Buddhism, and you know, when you read certain Buddhist texts, the people who wrote them, they clearly, oh so clearly and directly hit your ego, you know? And whenever you start getting into some kind of, well, I'm spiritually superior because I see this, they totally shred it. Yeah. Whenever you start competing with one of your fellow practitioners because you want to look better than they do or get more praise than they do or be more well-known than they do, they completely shoot it down. And they, you know, the texts and the teachers, they say, this has nothing to do with spiritual practice. This is ego stuff. Yeah. And so I think you really need that, because alone, without that, you know, without the wise influence of a tradition and a teacher, our ego can justify and rationalize anything.
Yes, yes. And I think this would be a great place to circle back to your own experience, because you said you had been involved in some kind of, you know, exploring some like new age ideas, and I'm sure you were reading and being exposed to all sorts of different philosophies. But I'm assuming that's what really resonated with you when you came into contact with these lamas, that these were people that were not operating from a place of ego, that were definitely pulling from something much larger and really just trying to spread that to their students.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I was extremely fortunate because I met fantastic teachers from day one. You know, this other little dabbling I had done was only for a few months, nothing much. But it's like I met these fantastic teachers, and I could see by the way they lived their lives, by the way they talked to other people, you know, you could see their qualities in action. Yeah. And you could tell they weren't just trying to get a group of people trotting around after them like little puppy dogs, panting, saying, my guru's a Buddha, my guru's enlightened. But these were the real McCoy, because they were talking about compassion in a way that was so profound that it's not a kind of compassion you can fake.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so hugely important, and that's a real battle, is finding, you know, these pure-hearted people to learn from, because there are a lot of people out there that have massive distrust of religious teachers and gurus, and you know, think of everything as cults or money-making schemes or whatever. And I mean, those things are real, and those are real things that you need to watch out for. And kind of, again, asking this question of, in our culture, in our place that we're at right now, where we're just kind of sticking our fingers and toes in the inner waters with things like meditation and, you know, what's popularly called mindfulness. How does somebody practically really begin this journey of inner work? Because, you know, it's almost like the two worlds are mutually exclusive. Like the world of, like you were saying, the world of climbing the corporate ladder and, you know, having a nuclear family and et cetera, how can somebody do those things, those regular everyday things, and have an inner practice without just being sucked away from that life, just like the Buddha was. If anybody knows the story of the Buddha, his father, he was born into a royal family, and his father tried to shield him from anything that might, send him on a spiritual path, and inevitably, that's what ended up happening anyway. Once he, experienced suffering and experienced the phenomenon of disease and death. And I mean, for me, I feel this inner conflict. Like, I've always been fascinated by, these paths and these things that stand outside of, the economic reality of the United States. And it's kind of like you almost feel this tug of war inside of yourself. Is there a way to peacefully exist in a center point, do you think?
Okay, I can give you the standard answer that you'll like, and I can give you what I really think.
Oh, I can't wait, yeah.
So I'll give you first the standard answer, okay? So you're basically asking, how can you have a family and a career and a nice, happy, worldly life together with a deep spiritual life, okay?
Right, have nice clothes.
Yeah. Okay, so the standard answer is it depends on your motivation. And so every morning when you wake up, make a strong motivation not to harm anybody, to be of benefit, to see yourself when you go to work, create a good motivation and think, I'm going, whatever. First of all, don't work in a job that directly causes harm, like the weapons industry or the pesticide industry or something like that. But
so I have to quit my job.
Yeah, okay. But have a motivation that, by doing my work, may the clients benefit, or may the the customers benefit. And by doing my work, may I create a happy environment in my workplace, and a peaceful environment, and be of benefit to the people that I see in my work. And, at home, may I raise my children very well, inculcate good values in them, teach them to be ethical people, have a harmonious relationship with my spouse. So you generate that kind of motivation, and then you live by it as much as possible. You would learn the techniques for how to manage your anger, how to overcome greed, and some of the basic Buddhist practices here to work with disturbing emotions that create problems. And so you live like that, you practice in that way, you create a lot of merit, you dedicate the merit for the welfare of all sentient beings. Once in a while you try and go to teachings regularly. Maybe there's a Dharma center near where you go, so you go regularly to the center. Maybe once a year you go for a retreat, where your teacher is leading a retreat, so you have a little bit more intense practice, and you live peacefully and happily like that. And and especially a very important part of that is to live an ethical life. And so to really have right livelihood, to keep good ethics, not to cheat or lie or, do bad business practices, not to sleep around with all sorts of different people, which creates, a lot of discord in the family. Yeah. So basically, to live an ethical life, and practice like that. And I would say do that. Okay? Now, the other answer I would give to a person, and that's the answer I would give to one kind of person. Okay? Let's say a person's married, they have a family already. They really want to they love their career, they want to do that, they love their family, they want to have kids. That's the advice I would give to that person, okay? To another person who says, I have this conflict, I'm pulled towards these things that bring happiness in my life, but I'm also pulled towards spiritual things. And the conflict is that somehow these two things are not fitting together, and somehow I don't have time for both of them in my life. And the more I do this one, it interferes with doing that one. And the more I do that one, it interferes with this one. And yet I can't really unglue myself from the situation. To that person, I would say, check up. Look at what is really important to you in your life. It's very, very difficult to have these two things together. I mean, that's why I ordained, because I was married before, when I met the Dharma. And I came to I didn't have any kids, but I came to the point where I saw, I loved my job. I was working with kids, I was a teacher. But, I can't live this life and have the time and everything else it takes to really go deeply in my spiritual practice. I just can't do it. Maybe some other people can, and that's wonderful. And I support them if they can do that, but I can't. And for me, when I think about, when I die, what is really going to be of value? Yeah, when I really sit down and think very closely, when I die, what do I want to be able to look back on this life and say, this was meaningful? It became very clear to me that what's meaningful is my spiritual practice. Yeah, and yes, I could do all these other things, and they may be nice, but at the end of the day, they weren't going to really satisfy me inside. And so at that point, I had to make some clear decisions about I had to set my priorities very clearly and then make clear decisions regarding them.
I think that's really powerful. I think that's extremely powerful and just very true and very transparent. And it hits the nail on the head, I think, for me and a lot of people, because it's really either at some point in your life you take a hard account of yourself and the things that really matter, and you cut away the things that don't matter and leave those things behind, and you move forward consciously with purpose, or you just allow life's stream to carry you in its momentum and only make decisions when you really need to make decisions, and your mind really tends to run the show in ways that you're not even cognizant of.
Yep.
And I admit, I feel like I exist in that current more often than I would like to. And I'm curious, and okay, I guess this is a selfish question now. What sort of advice would you give someone like me who's maybe still trying to, find their direction in life? Because, and as I was talking about earlier with your student, I guess I tend to attract other, young white men, both as guests and as listeners. So I think there's a lot of, people in a similar situation, a similar mindset to myself, kind of struggling to define ourselves and really develop strong habits and, rituals that will really allow us to have stronger minds and more self-aware and compassionate minds. What kind of advice do you give to people in that situation?
I would say go and listen to teachings from different Buddhist teachers and listen to what they say and examine it using reasoning and see if it makes sense logically. Try it out in your own experience and see what happens. Yeah, and really think clearly about what is important. So that you find a spiritual tradition that really sets forth the path, and the path consists of the kind of qualities that in your heart you want to develop, and find a teacher who can guide you on that path. Not blindly following this teacher. I'm not talking about, surrender to the guru kind of rubbish. I'm not talking about that. But to have the guidance of somebody who can direct you to where you want to go. And then do it. Because it's like it's like a turkey standing on the fence when Thanksgiving is approaching.
Yeah, it really is. That's a good,
Yeah?
great metaphor, yeah.
You know, you're that turkey on that. Are you going to keep standing there until something in life makes you go one way or another? Because what's going to make you go is going to be Thanksgiving, isn't it?
Yes.
Which for the turkey is not Thanksgiving. Yeah. Or you're the turkey and you say, oh, there's the choice of Thanksgiving, or there's the choice of, you know, what can I do to have a meaningful life? You know?
Yeah.
And you do it. Yeah?
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought and a beautiful piece of advice, and I'm definitely going to endeavor to do that. And I think another struggle I've had is just, you know, I guess at this point I've become I hesitate to say serial agnostic, because that makes me sound very, you know, like it makes me sound like I reject everything I come across, but it's more like I have this, you know, interdisciplinary approach to knowledge and experience, and I want to try things, and I want to come into contact with different ideas, and more often than not, I come away still feeling unsure, but being more okay with the unsureness. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, as you've dove deeper into your studies over the years, do you feel more unsure, like still kind of an overarching feeling of, at the end of the day, I don't really know anything, or do you feel like you've really come into contact with some concrete knowledge that you're very confident in?
I feel both. I feel that what I've learned is something, I feel that the tradition I'm following was taught by an enlightened being. It's been practiced over the centuries. People have gained those realizations. What they've gained is the kind of person that I want to become, knowing that within becoming an awakened one, you're not a cookie cutter personality. There's like incredible vastness, as you're not limited by your ego and your confusion. Yeah. So I don't see awakening as, you know, okay, chop you out with a cookie cutter and there you are. So in one way I feel like the path it's really articulating the kind of qualities I want. I can see that there's people further along on the path than me who can lead me on that path, and I feel a great confidence in that. At the same time, looking at my own mind and my own spiritual development, I have so far to go. I don't know anything, you know, when it comes to really transforming my mind when an afflicted state of mind arises. You know, it's hard work. And just even noticing when there's an afflictive state of mind, that's hard work. So that's what I mean by I see both things, you know. I can feel confidence in the tradition and the path, but myself as an individual following it, long way to go.
Yes, yeah, and I that's always to me, that's always an indicator of somebody who is worth listening to. When they can admit that, when they can admit, you know, that they're not an all-knowing, omniscient, you know, guru being.
Yes.
And you know, like thankfully, I've not come into contact with many of those people. I think I consciously steer clear of that because I find it to be, you know, mostly bullshit. But you know, I'm curious because you have studied under some really, you know, highly regarded teachers in your tradition. I mean, you studied under the Dalai Lama, and I'm curious, despite what we were saying about, you know, maintaining a sense of skepticism when you come into contact with these teachers and these gurus, is there something palpable that you feel? Do you feel something when you're in the presence of those people that feels very genuine?
Now I do. At the beginning, what I want to say is, people come at this, people have very different personalities. Yeah, again, it's not cookie cutter. So some people, I've talked to people who, they're not Buddhist, they're happy, they're happy in their own religion, but they go to hear a public talk by the Dalai Lama, and as soon as he walks on stage, they start crying and they don't understand why.
Wow.
So I've talked to those people. I am not one of those people. I'm very, okay, let's sit down and I'll listen to what you say, and I'll think about it, and I'll watch how you act, and I'm not one of these kind of wow, I got hit by a lightning bolt kind of people, okay? So, but there are some people like that. But those people, even if you get hit by the lightning bolt, you still have to come back and put your feet on the ground. Yeah? Spirituality is not about airy-fairy, like, wow, this is, I am one with everything, kind of stuff. I remember many years ago, I was living in Hong Kong, as a nun, and I was asked to go speak at one of the international schools to an assembly of little kids. So this was the time of Uri Geller. You may remember him. He was the Israeli who had psychic powers and could bend things at a distance. So one little kid raises their hand and says, "Can you bend spoons that were far away?" And as if that would be the demarcation of being a very special spiritual person. And I said to this little kid, he was so cute, I said, "No, but you know what? I'm not sure bending somebody else's spoons would make them happy or help the world."
Yes, that's great. That's such a great point, because there are people who get hung up on these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
How, they heard some legend, or they saw something, or, experienced some state of consciousness, and while those things may be real, like you said before, you get hit by that lightning bolt, and then you have to put your feet on the ground and do something with that. And, I think these experiences can be useful, because I've personally, experienced, states of consciousness that really reframed my reality, and I think stained me in a way that has changed my perception of life forever. But it's always about trying to hold on to something from those states, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Yep.
Because it's, you go to those places and you're so sure for about 24 hours that you've just re-experienced the energy of creation, and you're imbued with it, and everybody else has it too, but they just forgot about it, and you have to go out there and remind them, and it just fades and fades and fades like a dream. And it takes real work to exist in that place. I believe that's a real place. I believe there's a real, energy that we're all connected to. But man, it's not something that you can just, have a brush with and then take with you like a briefcase for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quick, cheap, and easy enlightenment. I think that's really the point. There's a big difference between having a spiritual experience and being fully in an integrated, stable person on the path. Because our mind can create so many different experiences. I mean, you drop acid and, who knows what you see, or mescaline, or you smoke dope, and, yeah. So there's all sorts of things like that. But does that mean that you're really a spiritual person? So what, I see real spirituality as a stable inner transformation. For example, you know what I would see as real progress for myself is if no matter what somebody said to me, no matter how much they ridiculed me or pointed out my faults or accused me of things I didn't do or discriminated against me, if I could remain calm and compassionate, that is what I would call a useful spiritual realization.
Yes, yes, but I do think that those sort of almost like decalcifying experiences can be very powerful, especially for certain people that are just so rooted in their skepticism and so unwilling to consider anything but some sort of like materialist idea.
Right.
I think there are some people that I would just love. Mr. Richard Dawkins, I would love to see what you would have to say after an acid trip. I would really love to hear that.
Yeah.
But I'll digress on that point. And I want to ask you more about, getting to that place step by step. And I know that you're far too humble to say that this is a reality that you exist within. But if you are able to get to that state of what people commonly call enlightenment, how do you define that? Is it definable? What does that mean?
Okay, I can give you the definition, but are you asking for the definition or are you asking about how that manifests in daily life?
Ooh, I don't know. I guess what I'm curious about is what is, I think this is almost a ridiculous question, and I don't know if it's answerable, but what is the consciousness of an awakened being like, if you had to try to describe it or put it in a term that a dummy like me could understand?
Okay, I'll tell you what my teachers have said. I'm not speaking from any personal experience, okay? It would be a state of mind in which all the defilements have been abandoned. So ignorance, anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, laziness, lack of integrity, lack of conscientiousness, negligence, all these kind of unwelcome mental states that disturb our mind and make us do actions that cause harm to ourselves and others. And these actions are, the harm they create is now and also in future lives. So somebody who's eliminated all of that so that they're not trapped in the wheel of constantly recurring rebirth under the influence of ignorance. And so not only abandoning everything that is limiting and defiled, but also they have developed their own inner qualities limitlessly, So love, compassion, wisdom, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, perseverance, joyous effort, concentration, all these kind of good qualities have been developed limitlessly. Yeah? So that an enlightened one's mind is not going to be swayed by, somebody likes you, somebody doesn't like you, you get what you want, you don't get what you want. It's not somebody whose mind is whatever sense object they see, it was like, wow, I want that. They're completely, regarding sense objects, completely equal. Things come, things go. They enjoy them while they're there, they go, they don't cling on, they don't try and recreate. Yeah, they aren't looking for happiness outside of themselves because they're completely content inside because they've developed themselves. So they don't need external things to give them pleasure. In fact, they see sense objects as something quite distracting. Yeah. So that's, how I imagine an enlightened one's mind being. Somebody who every time they look at any sentient being, any sentient being, including one particular one that is a presidential candidate, whose name I'm not mentioning, can look at even people like that and have compassion. And have a mind that says, I want to benefit that person. That person's suffering. How can I help relieve that person from their suffering?
Yeah. I mean, that's a world full of those people would be a very different world. It would be a much better, much more harmonious place. And I think that's as noble as it gets, really. But being that we're so, the track that we're on is so far from that right now.
Yep.
So far from that. And most of our lives, if we do anything good or anything charitable, it's like, a tiny nugget of what our actions are. And I know I don't want to put you back in the spot of like writing out a prescription for people, but are there any just general like habits or meditations that are good for anybody to do that you could point to that you think people should try to build into their day?
That I can talk about. I think a meditation on loving kindness. But a lot of these meditations are intertwined, and you can do the meditation on loving kindness, but if you've developed equanimity beforehand, then your meditation on loving kindness is much deeper. Okay, so one thing I think that just as a simple thing to begin with to help people on a day-to-day basis is to think everybody else is just like me. They want to have happiness, they don't want to suffer. Everybody else is exactly like me. They may be different race, religion, ethnic group, political party, socioeconomic class, educational level, profession, all the different categories we have that we slot people in, to see all those away, no matter what age they are, what kind of health they're in, no matter whether they're attractive or unattractive, and no matter what species they are, including animals and insects. Everybody wants to be happy and not have pain. And to really sit down with that, and you may start out thinking about that in terms of the people that you're very fond of, your friends and your family, and tuning into their wish for happiness and not pain. But don't leave it at there, because that's going to be partial, because you're already fond of them. Move it over also to strangers. Somebody who you see on the bus, somebody at the grocery store, somebody at the bank. To strangers. Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on. Then, so you've gone from friends and relatives to strangers. Then go also to the people that you don't like, that you don't trust, that have hurt you, or that live the kind of life that or look in the kind of way that makes you disgusted, and look past all of that into their hearts and really see they just want to be happy and not suffer, exactly like me. And I think just doing that, I would prescribe that as a beginning thing, but it's actually quite profound when you get into it more and more.
Absolutely. That's such beautiful advice. And like for me, my poor man's little version of that is I'm a very kind of disorganized non-linear thinker, and I usually take something like this path to get something done. And that is not good for many aspects of my life, especially now with how busy I am, and I just find myself feeling like I don't have time for things. So now, as I make lists during the day, I always end every list with, this is going to sound so cheesy, but I end every list with do something nice.
Yeah.
Always just consciously decide to do at least one nice thing that you would not have otherwise done.
Yep.
On a daily basis. And I've been trying to do that for a little while, but I do find it powerful, and it's fun because your friends kind of look at you like, why did you just pay for that? Like, you didn't have to pay for that. And it's like, and he's like, oh, I'll get you back, and it's like, no, don't worry about it, you know? And,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a great feeling.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, I like that very much. Not only thinking it, but putting it into action. Yeah, and doing something kind for somebody, but also do it for strangers and people you don't like. And you know what sometimes is even harder than doing something kind is say something nice about someone. Not just our friends and relatives, but say something nice about strangers or people you don't like, you know, once a day, like your vitamins, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, praise somebody to their face. Tell somebody you're jealous of how you really admire something that they just did.
I like that. It's like
Yeah.
kindness vitamins. Kindness vitamins.
Yeah.
That should be the title of this chat. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I guess we're about an hour in at this point.
Yeah.
I definitely want to be respectful of your time, but is there anything else that is coming to mind that you want to dive into at all?
Yeah, think clearly and really think about what's important in life. And live from your heart about what you feel is important. And don't let yourself get sidetracked by something that glitters in the moment, but is not going to glitter forever. And this is tricky because when it glitters in the moment, we don't always think of how it's going to look later. We think it's going to glitter all the time. So don't get distracted by glitter. You know, really follow suit and be willing to, don't look for the quick, cheap, easy way. Look for the path of compassion and wisdom. Yeah?
Beautiful. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for that.